Hello.
Oh, it signed me in as you, Andres.
Sorry.
It signed me in as you.
So let's stop recording now, Andres. Suggest that we start recording. All right. Okay, everybody, thanks so much for joining us. I'm going to call this meeting of the College of Patent Agent and Trademark Agents Board, officially calling the meeting to order. So I'd like to start with an approval of the agenda, if I may.
I would so
Everyone,
move.
thank you, Doug. Thanks so much, Grima. Perfect. Okay, our agenda is so approved. I am going to just provide a few introductory remarks, and then we're going to go to a declaration of conflict of interest once we've established the agenda. So first of all, I want to welcome everybody, college board members, our management staff, guest presenters, and members of the public who might be listening remotely. Before we get started, I just want to take a moment to note that the college was closed for Canada's inaugural National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. Board members were provided some thought-provoking messages from management to consider and reflect upon, and we really want to thank you so much for that. On behalf of the board, thank you to management. That was really appropriate, so much appreciated. In future, the college will need to address how careful consideration of all that's encompassed in the spirit of truth and reconciliation ought to affect our approach to our work, particularly our regulatory work, in light of our stated objectives to regulate in a manner that respects equity, diversity, and inclusion. So great food for thought that we will really take to heart. So Daryl, thanks to you and your team for that. We've got a real jam-packed agenda today. Committee matters before us will assist the board in meeting its obligations, including appointments to the registration committee, as well as terms of reference and skills matrices for the audit and risk and governance and nominating committees. Board members have also received a briefing memo on the nomination and election process that's intended to start a discussion. So no decisions are being made today, but it will be important for board members to really share their views so that this important work can move forward with management. One of the most significant items on the agenda today relates to adopting a policy to allow for development of bylaws mandating liability insurance for the profession. So the board needs to ensure that we're meeting our public protection obligations, and I expect this is going to form a good part of what I anticipate to be robust discussion. So thanks everybody. Just wanted to set the stage on that. I'd now like to ask if there are any conflicts of interest, board members, any board members who need to declare a conflict regarding matters on this agenda. Okay.
I would
Jeff?
declare some sort of a conflict, since I am a patent and trademark agent, and we're going to be talking about insurance and other matters for them, but I don't think that I have a clear conflict in that regard.
It's a super good point, Jeff. I think that by virtue of the fact that there will be elected members to this board who do represent the profession, if you will, we're always going to have that little bit of a built-in conflict. So good to recognize it, good to get it on the table. I think we're okay to proceed. So unless anyone sees different, I think we're good. All right, but thanks, Jeff. That's a super good point. Okay, our next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. The consent agenda today contains the minutes of our July 29th, 2021 meeting. And assuming that all have reviewed the board materials in advance, and which includes those minutes, I would like to ask for someone to make a motion to approve those minutes. Doug, thank you. Thank you. And Jeff, I saw your hand up to second. So could I get a vote on approval of those minutes, please? Perfect. Okay, unanimous. Appreciate that. Okay, the next section of our agenda is registration committee appointments. So the board has received a really good information package from management around the process and the names that are being put forward for recommendation. And I'm going to ask Jen to speak to that, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in my memo, I provided a list of 5 potential appointees to the registration committee. I'll give you a brief overview of each of the candidates for your information for the decision. So Tina McKay is the proposed chair for the board. She currently works with the Law Society of Alberta, and she has over 10 years of experience in regulation. She also used to be a practicing trademark agent, so she's inactive now. She's class 2, but she used to have that trademark practice experience as well. She used to manage the membership and customer service department, and for 7 years, she was the staff lawyer for their education and credentials committee. So I believe that she will play a really important role as our first chair to the registration committee, having both agent experience as well as public regulation experience. Mark Pioro is the proposed vice chair, and he has over 9 years of experience with the College of Physiotherapists of Ontario as their deputy registrar and general counsel. He has experience researching, drafting, and presenting policies, and has represented their college on over 100 registration matters before the Health Professions Appeal and Review Board. So he has a very strong background in understanding how registration processes work, how the appeal processes work, and fair registration principles and practices. Ms. Hillary Rose was recommended by Ruth, and she is a member of CPA Alberta and the Institute of Corporate Directors. She has a lot of background information, audit and finance, and various human resources initiatives. So I think that she will bring a really interesting and positive perspective and experience to reviewing registration decisions, given her breadth of experience in human resource matters. Jeffrey Orser is a representative from CPO. So CPO has recommended his appointment to the registration committee from the patent branch. So he's an executive with over 18 years of experience in intellectual property. He's fluent in both English and in French. Provides strategic leadership and oversight to the patent branch, and was a previous section head for the patent branch for 6 years. He also used to be a patent examiner. So he has a lot of background information about the practice of a patent agent. Martin Beliveau is our CPO representative from the trademarks branch, and he is the current chair of the trademarks opposition board. So he sets the strategic direction and leads operations for the quasi-judicial tribunal, manages a team of decision makers, and oversees their department. So I thought that these 5 names were very strong candidates to bring forward to the board for our inaugural registration committee slate. So the registration committee allows for 7 members, and 5 of those members are being brought forward to you today, one of which fills the role of an agent. So we have 4 public members and we'll have 3 agents. So the 2 additional roles that we need to fill, I'm recommending that we put a call out for participation from a patent agent and another trademark agent or a patent agent to fill the remaining 2 roles. And I believe I also specified that they should be, I can't remember what I wrote in here. One second. Oh, down here, there it was. Okay, so we are hoping that we are able to get some additional people from different provinces. We have several candidates from Alberta and Quebec, so we need additional provinces, at least one who identifies as a female, at least 5 years in practice, and experience as an in-house or sole practitioner, or experience in a large firm. So those are the types of qualities that we will be looking for in those 2 roles.
That's great.
Questions.
Thanks so much, Jen. Just before I open the floor to questions, I did just want to make a comment on one of the remarks you made, and just kind of similar to what Jeff said at the beginning of the meeting. So you had indicated that I had recommended Hillary Rose. I just wanted everyone to know that when I was asked to think about who might be a good representative from the West, I have served on other boards with Hillary, and she is currently on a committee that I chair. So I know of Hillary that way, but I don't have any sort of a personal or conflicted relationship with her, just FYI to all of you. And just another quick process question. It sounds like you've done a fabulous job on this, Jen. Thank you so much. Mm-hmm. And terrific slate of candidates. That's great. Can you just tell us just a wee bit about your process? So clearly you looked into their backgrounds, you reviewed their resumes. Was there some
Yes.
sort of an interview process, or did you
Yes.
share the terms of reference with them so they're really clear on what it is they're getting into?
For sure. Yeah, I can speak to that. So I reached out to some of the board members and some of the other consultants that we've been working with to identify some candidates that might be a good fit for this position. So I started there. I also did my own research and looked at various law societies and accounting professions, engineering professions, their websites to see who were currently on their boards and their executive management teams to kind of put some feelers out there and see if there were anybody else that were interested in participating in this. And so we did get another response back, but it was a little bit too late in the game. So there's another individual that is from CPA Nova Scotia, for example, that Daryl and I will be speaking with next week, and hopefully they will be able to support another committee. So we did put some feelers out there to see who would be interested. And so all the candidates that were put forward, I had a discussion with them, a Zoom call. We went through the terms of reference, the skills matrices to see if there were any questions or anything that they had about those things. With Tina and Mark, we discussed a lot of procedural things because they have that registration procedural perspective. So that was really good for me to bounce ideas off of them. And it gave me a good idea that they would fill those roles really well for us.
That sounds great. Thank you so much. I'm going to open the floor now to questions from the board. Okay, seeing none, I'm going to ask if someone from the board would like to approve this slate of candidates.
I would move approval.
Thank you so much, Doug. Do I have a seconder? Karima, thank you so much for seconding. All in favor? Karima, I'm assuming you're in favor since you seconded. Perfect. Okay, you have got yourself a slate, Jen. So thank you so much. That's great. Daryl, did you have any thoughts you want to share, or are we good to move on to the next agenda item?
Very briefly. So at the last meeting, we appointed the investigations committee, and then we went to the profession for expressions of interest for that committee and for the discipline committee. And we're in the process now of reviewing those names. Don't want to say we were overwhelmed, but we certainly received a number of very highly qualified expressions of interest from members of the profession. So we're going through the same process that Jen just described. We're collecting resumes. We will be, I don't want to call it an interview, but we'll certainly be engaged in a voice-to-voice discussion, a face-to-face discussion with each of them before we bring names to the board at the next meeting. And we'll go through the same process with the profession members for the registration committee, and we'll get that call for expressions of interest out fairly quickly.
That sounds great. It sounds like we're following excellent governance practices in all of this. So thank you. That's wonderful. Appreciate that. Okay, our next agenda item is the board policy on nominations and elections. So Daryl, could I hand over to you, please, to introduce that topic and get the board discussion started?
So members of the board will recall that at a very early draft of the bylaws, when we were looking at this many, many months ago, we began to look at what nomination election process might look like. And I put forward at that point some initial bylaws that were fairly detailed about the process. We determined that we would strip out of the bylaws all the detail and move them into policy. So I kept all those documents, and then began to develop a policy on which we will then create something more robust once the board gives some broad direction. I shared this with Doug and Jeff. We had several discussions about what the nature of a nominating and election process might look like, and that's what you have. So that's how we got here. It's fairly straightforward. I think if there's anything controversial, and it's already enshrined in the bylaw, is that people will have to, who seek to be elected, will have to go through an orientation program. that the college sponsors so that they know what they are coming into. And as we go through the election process, there is the kind of the other half of the future board, which is the appointment process. And my hope is that within a couple of weeks, we will be able to begin discussions again with the minister's office about what that process might look like. So what you have before you is kind of an outline of a set of dates, a set of dates. And I propose the dates in light of the fact that I believe that the annual meeting, which the bylaws require will be in the first 6 months of the year, will be in May. So that kind of creates a I'll call it a turnover of board members in May. And so we would have an election in January, which would then allow people to begin to come into the college without having to jump onto the board immediately. They would have a few months for us to do some orientation and training to get them acclimatized, and they would then take office following the annual meeting in May. And again, obviously, we would hope that when the minister appoints, that those people will also fit into the same cycle. And it's an electronic election process. There is provision for some, I use the word in inverted commas, campaigning, because we would make available two things. One, space on the website for individuals to communicate with the profession, and provide nominees or candidates with information that would allow them to communicate with the profession. There's just one issue that I'll note, because we more Jeff than we had a discussion about, well, what should be required for a nomination? Should there be some requirement that several people nominate an individual? And in the end, I went through, this was Daryl Pink speaking to myself, because I never argue, I never lose those fights. I, in the end, said, you just need a single nomination. And I think that is an issue. Do you need many people to nominate you? In the end, I came down and said, no, if a person's interested in running for office with a single nomination, they should be able to put their name forward without having to, there are in some organizations, some national bodies, you need to be nominated by people in multiple provinces or multiple geographic areas. And I suggested that that is somewhat of, gives a false sense of security. I couldn't truly rationalize any legitimate basis for that. So I didn't do that. And so that's the nomination piece. And then, of course, the bylaws do provide that any disputes with regard to anything get dealt with by an election commissioner. So as part of this process, we will have to identify and appoint an election commissioner. So that's the background, but I invite Doug and Jeff to add anything in terms of their thoughts.
Doug, Jeff, feel free to jump in. I have a couple of questions for when the time is right, but please feel free, Jeff.
I have no comments. I was just unmuting for that.
Gotcha. Doug, do you have anything you'd like to add to what Daryl's shared with us?
Well, I raised a number of potential concerns, but the question is whether those things would really occur. And it was felt that we should run the election based upon the one that Daryl had prepared. And if there are abuses of some kind, either will be dealt with by the election commissioner, or they can be dealt with on the next round of elections. So I'm satisfied with where we ended up.
That's great. Thanks so much, Doug. Karima, do you have any questions before I jump in with mine?
No, nothing for me. Thanks, Ruth.
Okay, thanks so much. So Daryl, I just have two questions around process. One is the nomination process. So when you landed on, that you only need one person to nominate you, I found, I don't know, I just had sort of a gut reaction to that and thinking, okay, it should be at least two. I don't know. What do other board members feel? Do you think it's fine to have only one person nominate you, or does anybody have any thoughts on that? No, I'm seeing no other thoughts on it. So
I think from my perspective, Ruth, I had the same pause, but I think at the end of the day, I landed where Daryl, led us to, which is at the end, there is other processes in place for that individual. And so I'm quite comfortable with leaving it at one.
Sounds good. And it sounds like everybody else is comfortable with that too. So that's great. That was my first question. My other question, though, Daryl, was around the process for providing information, providing licensee email contact information to candidates. My concern or my question is, what is our authority to provide registrants' email contact information to a third party? My thought is, unless we have their permission, it would seem to me to be a breach of privacy to provide their information to a third party for the purposes of electioneering. So when people give us their contact info, it is supposed to be used for the business purpose in which it was provided to us. And I don't know that I can comfortably crosswalk over to, now I'm going to hand it out to somebody else who's going to electioneer to them. I don't know.
You're bang on. You're right in terms of the issue. We will need a privacy opinion on this. What we're providing, there's nothing we're providing that is not public information. So someone could mine the register and get all this information. So
Fair enough.
All we're doing is making it easier for them to do it. We're not requiring them to go through a process. So that's the rationale that I use in putting forward that proposal. It's information that is currently available anyway. Just we make it easier.
You know, Daryl, and I take that point, but for example, if I provide my email address to Amazon, you know, my email address is publicly available in different places, but if I provide it to Amazon, I'm not giving Amazon permission to share it with Salesforce. You know, I just feel that they've provided it to the college for purposes of the college to conduct its business. And I'm just wanting to state, I don't feel comfortable in us then sharing that information without people's permission. So if when we obtain that information from registrants, if we were to say, we're going to provide this, you know, to any candidates to be able to communicate with you or something, and they agree to that, that's okay. But otherwise, I don't know, I feel weird about it. Jeff, you had a thought.
Yeah, I mean, and I wonder if there's another way to achieve the same end. It might be more complicated from a technical perspective, but if prospective candidates were to provide information to the college and that was simply posted to a place on the college's website, it would make it universally available to the members to peruse, and there would be no need to actually send those email addresses out.
And we have that already, Jeff. So this is saying there's two things we'll do. One, we'll provide them a spot on the website, and two, we will provide them with email contact information. So, you know, that's why I was feeling uncomfortable with us being the ones passing on contact information. So I guess no need to debate it any further. Daryl has said we would get a privacy assessment before we would do this. I just wanted to state that I don't feel comfortable with it. So Doug, you had a thought.
Yes, and that is this. Let's say that the communication went out, but instead of providing the mailing list, we sent out an election email.
Or like a newsletter kind of thing with
a newsletter with the comments of the various candidates.
Yeah.
So we have not shared the email address. We've sent the candidates the communication that they desired. That's a possibility, but I agree. Let's see what the privacy opinion is, and that's perhaps a way it could be handled as an alternative matter.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay, so any other thoughts or comments on this? This was an item for discussion. So again, no decision needed today, but wanted to get this information to you so the board can provide their thoughts to Daryl, and Daryl can move ahead with this. So Daryl, it doesn't look like there's any more discussion from the board. So do you feel you've got what you need to move forward?
So I will turn this into a more formal policy for board approval.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
And I will get that private. I will make sure we have the privacy opinion. And I think the suggestion, there's always a risk when the regulator, I'll say, there's a question of passive participation and support for a democratic process, which is the allowing of material to be posted. That's the passive piece.
Yeah.
The active piece is distributing material. And so there's a fine line there, and whether it's the regulator's role to distribute material as opposed to individuals distributing themselves. So I think the privacy opinion will assist us in making that final decision.
Yeah, I so agree. And just for the record, here's what I would be most comfortable with in our role as a regulator, that when we're holding an election, we send a communication to members to say an election is coming up. Here is a link to our website that has the slate of candidates, and each candidate has been able to post a little bit of information about themselves. So we encourage you to go in, take a look at it, and then place your vote. So that's what I would be comfortable with. So just FYI.
And just one more point. I mean, providing a list of email addresses suggests that the individual candidates can actually direct their communications to subsets of the profession, as opposed to being transparent with their platform to the entire profession. So, I mean, you know, putting it on the website and then actively pointing people back to the website that there's something new for them to look at there solves the privacy issue and makes sure that everyone is transparent with their platform.
That's an excellent point. So you know what, with that being said, I wonder if we even want to just say, you know what, Daryl, we don't want to be providing email addresses to candidates. Let's limit it to the website, creating a presence on the website that they can populate. Okay, good. Okay, perfect. Thanks so much. Okay, look at us barreling through this agenda. Okay, next item is the update on the RFQ process regarding our appointment of an auditor. So Daryl, if you could please update the board on that.
I'm going to turn it over to Sean.
Okay,
and by the way,
perfect.
this is a for information item as opposed to there's no decision to be made.
Right. Okay, Sean.
Okay, so
thank you.
So using the information, Ruth, that you provided to us here within the last few weeks, I was able to pull together a short document that we could use as an RFQ, or a request for quotes, not an official full-blown RFP or request for proposals. And I sent that, and I contacted 6 local firms here in Halifax, and 4 said that they would be interested in taking a look at the document and providing a quote. So it went to EY, MNP, KPMG, and Grant Thornton. And the timeline is they have till end of day this Friday to send back their quote and we've asked for additional information from in the quote process around some advice as well, where we're going to have 2 fiscal year ends that we want to have an audit opinion on, and where we're a new regulator, a new organization, wanted to get their thoughts on the background and how it should work. We also made it mandatory that they had the ability to provide both the financial statements and the audit reports in both English and French. So that's why we went with the large firms, but the bigger firms, so that they would have that ability. We also made sure that they would have a national presence, was one of the mandatory criteria. So each of those do have offices across the country. And I have had a couple of follow-up questions from each of the firms. So I expect to see that information by the end of the week.
That sounds great. Thanks so much. Daryl, do you have anything to add before I open it to the board for questions?
No, I think Sean did distribute this month's the financial statements that are in the package, so that they had a more up-to-date picture of our financial situation.
Yeah, and we will be talking about the financial situation when we talk about the CEO's report as well, right? So, because that was part of your report, Daryl.
Yes.
So yeah, so later we've got an agenda spot for that, so that's great. But just with regard to the process by which we will select our auditor that Sean has just walked you through, does anybody have any questions or comments on that process? So the outcome of this process, once we've got this request for quotes, will be that I think, Daryl and Sean will review it. Perhaps I'll, chat with them about it and make sure that we've got everything we think we need. And then we'll be bringing this to the board for approval of our auditor. So just so that you know what's happening behind the scenes as we take care of this important matter. So any questions for Sean? Okay, I think we're good to move on then to the next section of our agenda, which is our committee structure. So Sean, thanks for that, and stay tuned because we'll call you back when we're talking about the financial update. Okay,
Certainly.
thanks.
Certainly.
So committee structures. We have terms of reference and a skills matrix for our risk and audit committee and for our governance and nominating committee. Now, they were all sent to you in your board package, and then Karima made some really good wording enhancements. So no substantive changes to what was in the package, but enhanced wording to be more clear with both the terms of reference as well as the skills matrix. Has everybody had an opportunity to review Karima's friendly amendments? And if so, let's put a motion on the table to approve those terms of reference and skills matrices, and then we can have subsequent discussion.
I'm
Doug,
prepared to move.
thank you so much. Can I have a seconder? Karima, thank you. That's great. Okay, so now, Daryl, is it okay if we do both sets in one motion? Okay,
Yes.
so we've got a motion to approve the Risk and Audit Committee and Governance and Nominating Committee terms of reference and skills matrices. That motion is on the table. I'm just going to call for board discussion now. So if anyone has any comments, questions on any of those materials. Okay, it looks like we don't, which tells me that they were very well done. So thank you, Daryl and team. And it tells me that the board has done its due diligence in reviewing them all, and the board is comfortable in approving them with the friendly amendments that Karima sent along this morning. So that motion is on the table. We've now had opportunity for discussion. Seeing no further discussion, can I get a vote? Perfect. Thank you. So Jeff, Karima, are you both in favor? Okay, so all in favor, that motion is carried. Thank you. We have approved terms of references and skills matrices. That's great. Okay, the next item on our agenda is mandatory liability insurance. So following consultation with the profession, the board is asked to approve a resolution to set the policy regarding liability insurance that will result in the development of bylaws. So Daryl, I know you probably have some introductory comments as well as you have a guest speaker. You probably would like to introduce to the board and to any members of the public that are listening in. So I'll hand it over to you, Daryl.
Thank you. So we're joined today by Patrick Mahoney of AXIMA, and AXIMA has been acting as our consultant to assist us going back to the very beginning of when we began to look at the requirement for mandatory liability insurance. We started with a discussion paper that the board approved. We circulated that discussion paper to the profession and received feedback. The feedback was, well, it's summarized in Patrick's memo to me. We didn't get as much feedback as I thought we would. I actually anticipated we'd hear from some of the large firms in particular. We did not hear from them. And although we did have some numerous discussions both before and after with the chair of IPIC's insurance committee, Tim Lohman, who practices with Aird & Bearless, and has chaired the IPIC Insurance Committee for many years. We had numerous discussions with them as well. IPIC through Tim and the CEO of IPIC, Adam Kingsley, met with Jeff and Doug, I believe late last week. So we have provided to you a proposal, which is again sets a policy for the profession. I revised my initial memo to you yesterday and circulated it because I thought it was important to reflect why I had changed my thinking from the original draft that was circulated to the board to this draft. The original thinking, and this came out in part from the consultation process, was that although there's no question we need mandatory liability insurance is a requirement, the Act specifies that. So that the issue of whether it should be mandatory is not anything that this board has any say over. The Act prescribes it. And the only issue for the board is to set what the nature of the mandatory liability insurance coverage is to be. We had no opposition to the requirement. That would have fallen on deaf ears, but we did not. What we did have was many lawyers who communicated with us, suggesting that there ought not to be a second or additional insurance requirement for the legal profession because the legal profession has mandatory liability insurance. So the 35% of the profession who are lawyers and agents already have insurance. And if I use Ontario, for example, this professional services in Ontario include acting as a patent agent and a trademark agent. So on the face of it, there is coverage at the same level that we are proposing, namely $1 million per claim, $2 million aggregate. So the arguments that were made by the profession is you ought not to add a second requirement. The difficulty with that approach and with those responses to the consultation process was that they missed what we believed is a crucial piece of the requirement for coverage for this profession, which is global coverage. In other words, that there should be insurance that will cover the conduct of a patent or trademark agent, regardless of where that claim is made. Or put another way, the intellectual property rights that a patent agent and a trademark agent register in Canada or elsewhere, by definition, have a global reach, even if the original intention is that it's only going to be registered in Canada. So that's, again, a real issue for this board to discuss as a policy question. Because if we conclude that coverage for claims made outside of Canada or global coverage is necessary, then the argument made by the legal profession falls to the side because the coverage provided by all the law societies, with the possible exception of British Columbia, would not be adequate because there is no coverage for claims made outside of Canada. There is also a small glitch with respect to the law society coverage, and it relates to whether all patent and trademark services are encompassed within the practice of law. I think there was an argument before the existence of CPATA that that could be the case. I think that now that CPATA exists and we are saying that licensed patent and trademark agents are delivering a specialized form of legal services, I don't think that you can argue that they're not providing, that what they're doing as a patent agent or a trademark agent does not fall into the practice of law. It's probably an issue that requires some further discussion. But we are, for all intents and purposes, a legal services regulator. And I think clarifying that as we go forward will be a really important thing to do. There is an issue of limits. So one of the questions that we raised in the consultation paper, and we received very little feedback on through the consultation process, was what are appropriate policy limits? The recommendation is that we adopt a policy with limits of $1 million per claim and $2 million aggregate. And the rationale for that is that the that is what is currently required in the legal profession. The policy also suggests that we look further at that by way of study, but we did not have the time or resources to complete that study in advance of this requirement. So Patrick can fill you in much more than I can, but the $1 million limit for lawyers has been in place since the late 1980s. There have been many discussions. In my previous life, I participated in many discussions where the question was, should you increase the policy limits? Even based on inflation, you would, that number would be much higher. But no law society insurer except Quebec has done that. Quebec has a minimum coverage of $5 million and I think a $10 million aggregate. So, but let me be clear, that's by virtue of the size of the fund that existed in Quebec rather than any detailed actuarial evaluation that came up with that number. So it wasn't because one could say the risk is such, the risk for lawyers in Quebec is 5 times that of lawyers in Ontario. It wasn't like that at all. But that is an important fact for the board to know. So we took the policy or proposed the policy limit that we did because there was some precedent to tie it to, although we recognize that it needs to be looked at more seriously. And finally, and I raised this in my memo to the board, I think the board has to consider the question of affordability. So in the discussion paper, we raised the question of whether there should be different approaches between patent agents and trademark agents. And it was an idea that we thought was worthy of some consideration. And when we raised it, we had not fully evaluated it. We just put it out as an idea. We got some positive responses from the profession that said, what a great idea. But in the end, we concluded based on the information we received and the input we received that it's not a very good idea. The reason it's not a good idea is because it would create 2 mini pools of coverage, patent agents and trademark agents. The pool that we're talking about is only 2,200, is only about 1,800 individuals. There are about 2,200 licenses. No, I'm correct, sorry, 2,200 individuals. That's the number there will be. So that's a very, very small in the world of insurance. Spreading the risk among this number is very small. So splitting that number into 2 smaller pools would have been self-defeating. And the information and the advice we received was that what you will do if you create 2 separate risk pools is you'll drive up the cost for both of them rather than allowing some of those costs to be deferred across a larger group. So for those of us who have dealt with legal insurance over the years, the analogy is that, well, there are never claims against criminal lawyers. And for 20 years, 30 years, we heard that all the time. Never claims against criminal lawyers. Why do you charge criminal lawyers the same as you charge real estate lawyers, against whom there are many claims? And the answer ultimately was, you never know what the future is going to hold. And in Canada now, whereas 10 years ago, there were no claims against criminal lawyers, most of the insurance programs in the legal insurance programs in Canada today have significant claims against criminal lawyers, largely arising as a result of claims for ineffective counsel. So that's a claim that didn't exist historically, but it exists all the time now. So we don't know what the future is going to be. And one of the purposes of insurance is to try and not identify all the risks, but create a pool that will deal with foreseeable risks. And for that reason, in the end, the recommendation is that there be a uniform requirement for patent and trademark agents because we simply don't know what the future will hold. So you have the draft resolution before you. We need to make a decision, although the board doesn't have to make a final decision today. We do have another board meeting scheduled for the 30th of this month, so we do have some time to do some additional work if required. And whatever decision the board makes will need to be reduced to writing in bylaws and ultimately go through the bylaw creation process. And I don't have a specific set of times for that right now, but that will have to be done. We do know that the policies, the renewal period for the current IPIC-sponsored policy is March 1st. And for the law societies, it is July 1st. So we have some time, a little bit of time, not a lot, but we have a little bit of time should that be required. So in Ruth, I'll leave it to you to determine whether you want Patrick to kind of add anything at this stage as well.
I sure think so, unless there any board member has a burning desire to make a comment before Patrick. Jeff, do you want to?
I do, and
okay.
I thought so,
okay.
Just because Patrick could then comment on it.
Sure. Yeah. Great point.
As he runs through his materials.
Great
as
point.
you know, first of all, I should say that it's too bad that we can't take the same approach that Canada Post does when they insure my parcels. I pay to get it delivered, and I'm the one that determines the amount of insurance that's required for the package being delivered, whether it's a bar of gold or just a box of sand. But that being unlikely, I did circulate a proposal, probably not well worded, but the gist of it being that if an individual who is already insured, or a professional that's already insured, is insured for greater limits already based on their own investigation of what's the appropriate limits for that individual, that this limit of liability minimum should not be seen as an opportunity to simply downgrade their coverage with the blessing of the college. I was trying to indicate, at least in my proposal, that if one's determination was that their limits should be higher, that they should be maintained at that higher level. My sense, both based on feedback that I've received from IPIC and just my own sort of anecdotal experience as to the value of a claim that might be that might arise with respect to a defect introduced into at least a patent, at both the Canadian level or at an even greater so at an international level, is that these limits seem small, and I don't know whether our responsibility is to protect a public interest, and I fully appreciate affordability and all of those considerations, but I just want to make sure that that we're continuing to monitor what this limit of liability is and make sure that it's appropriate in view of real world examples, and that this limit of liability is not seen as just the blessing of the college for anybody to downgrade their insurance levels to that amount.
That's such a good point. So our message is, this is a minimum, but our message, we need to be very clear in our wording that nobody construes that as, hey, we're here to tell you this is enough, right? There's a difference between this is a minimum and this is enough. So I think we will need to be super careful on the message. The messages are two-way. It's the giver and the receiver of the message. So we need to make sure that the message we're giving is being received the way we intended it to. So that's such a good point, Jeff. Thank you. Karima, did you have something you'd like to add before Patrick speaks?
I mean, I think it's really just a follow on from your comment, which is to make it clear that we're not suggesting that this is adequate insurance. We're suggesting that this is minimum, and it is incumbent on people to understand what their liability thresholds, their comfort zone, what their liability is, and find that balance for themselves, because we're not prescribing this as being what we think is adequate. We're sort of balancing a number of different considerations and saying, this is what we think at the very least you should have.
Yeah, exactly. So Patrick, with those thoughts in your mind, we're delighted to hear from you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to the meeting. I'm very happy to be here. Daryl and I have been working working on this for quite a while, and it's fun to see your faces and to talk these issues through. On the Daryl's covered the water pretty well, actually, from my perspective. But I just start off with that, with Jeff's point on the limits, and I totally agree with that. I mean, I think if you ask the Law Society, is $1 million enough for a corporate tax department of a large downtown law firm? They would say it's obviously not enough, and we are to some extent relying on the Canadians who are conservative by nature and tend to buy a lot of insurance in other areas to do the right thing in that area. But we don't expect the limit that we have put in as a minimum standard to cover everything that's ever going to come up. And if we had great data for intellectual property work, we would be able to look at that data and we would be able to say, you know what, if you have a limit of X, you're going to cover 90% of the losses, or you're going to cover, 90% of the losses, and there's going to be this much that's uninsured, and so on and so forth. We don't have that data. We did that exercise, funnily enough, for defalcation funds, for lawyers' compensation funds, when lawyers' mobility was coming into place, and they were looking at what requirements each of the provinces needed to satisfy the other provinces' law societies, and we did come up with numbers, and we just don't have that here. It would be nice if we did, and that's one of the challenges as you make the decision on what the right limit is that we don't have the data to kind of inform that decision, at least at this stage. We have a lot of anecdotal information, and we know how expensive it is to defend patent claims in particular, and the level of expert advice, expert witness advice, and so on. But anyway, stepping back from that,
Patrick, if you don't mind, Patrick, I don't want to lose that thought where you're saying we're needing to make a decision in the absence of sufficient data. How could we get that data? Is it available somewhere else? Is there somewhere we could, if barring gathering it ourselves, which we clearly can't do, is there somewhere else we might look to get that? Because of course we want as much data and information as we can, because as a regulator, we're a risk-based regulator. We want to make our regulatory decisions based on evidence and facts. And so what do you think?
There is data. Most of it would be in the Law Society programs for claims against lawyers. I did have conversations with most of the Law Society insurance, the heads of the programs as we were going through this exercise. Frankly, just ask them, have you had excessive limits claims? And the answer is yes, not very often, but we do excess of their $1 million. Most of those claims, there was excess insurance that the law firm or the individual had arranged. The other source of some data, if they would be willing to share it, and I don't know, is the EPIC program. I mean, we know, again, from just conversations, they have had claims in excess of the limits that they provide. So it's my sense is, unfortunately, though, just given the number of insureds that we're talking about here, even if we were to get data, I'm not sure it's going to be credible. I'm not trying to dodge the question. I'm just trying to say that we are, to some extent, looking at lawyers' experience, because that's a very big set of data, and trying to sort of interpolate that to find out, to see what the right place to be is. And is it as simple as saying IP agents are have a greater exposure than an average lawyer? Like, that's a pretty general comment. It doesn't help you very much. But that's kind of where I land compared to an immigration lawyer. Yes, they've got more exposure compared to, as I say, corporate tax lawyer. I don't know. The numbers are always. I've been involved as an insurer representative on IP litigation, and the claims are always eye-popping. They don't always turn out that way, but it is always a big number in the claim. So. Okay.
Well, fair enough. Thanks. Go ahead, Patrick.
Okay, so just sort of kind of underlining what Daryl was saying, the consultation process which took place over the summer, the feedback we got was I think it was exclusively from lawyers. There may have been one who wasn't a lawyer, but most of the feedback was from lawyers, and most of the feedback used their Law Society insurance program as a reference and was saying, we're regulated by law societies. These standards are adequate from their purposes. Why aren't they adequate for your purposes? And when we looked at this before the consultation process, We looked at what the existing cover was, and we identified the two issues that the respondents to the consultation process identified. One was limits, because we were suggesting 2 million per claim and 4 million in the aggregate. And I'll just make an additional comment that our recommendation, being Axima's recommendation, is that that's on a firm basis. So it's a little more friendly, if you will, than on an individual basis. The underlying law society coverage that lawyers might be relying on as well is on an individual basis. So each lawyer in a 10-person law firm has that 1 million, 2 million cover limit themselves. We would be looking at the firm. So there's a possibility, if we went down the road, of having maybe a slightly higher limit for a larger firm than a smaller firm, however you decide that. But we had identified that as an obvious one. And the second obvious point that the respondents focused on was the territorial requirements. And the law society cover is all over the map on this. It's unfortunate for me, having spent a fair bit of time working in this area, working with law society insurers and stuff like this. Some programs have good broad coverage, particularly, as Daryl said, BC. Other programs will limit or exclude cover for work done outside of Canada. They'll limit or exclude cover for work done on non-Canadian law. And some will exclude cover for lawsuits brought outside of Canada. And so there's those three kind of general principles that is the tough thing to grapple with here. If we don't require, you don't require, let me not speak for you, you don't require that cover for certain individuals, are you confident they will never be sued from outside of Canada? Are you confident that what they do in the future is not going to trip them up on that? So that's a really difficult, to me, conclusion to come to, that somebody, and we got this feedback. We got feedback saying, I only work in Canada. I don't do any work in front of the US PTO or whatever it's called and so on. I don't have that exposure. I shouldn't need to have that cover. And is IP work inherently international in nature or not, I guess, is what it boils down to. And we also did get, as Daryl said, we also did get feedback that on specific claim situations, law societies, some law societies were interpreting their policies quite narrowly about what is the definition of professional services in this area, including whether work was done by agents and not lawyers inside the firm and things like this. So it wasn't clear to us. Well, it's not. It's certainly, it's a conclusion that I come to, that many of the law society programs will not respond to a claim with an international element to it. So that's kind of what it boils down to. What I will say is, on the limits question, if you've got the first million, and I think what the recommendation from Daryl is, let's start with 1 million, 2 million, and study it and make sure that with that, or make an adjustment going forward. Once you got the first million, getting the second million is usually an incremental cost. What is not incremental is getting the international exposure covered, because if a law society doesn't respond to that, then the insurance that you buy from another provider has to be prepared to respond from first dollar. And that is, it is kind of like you're paying a law society a premium and you're paying another insurer premium for coverage from first dollar for the different type of exposure. And that is unfortunately not an incremental thing. So the last thing I think I would say, just as you try to sort of get your arms around this, is we're in the middle of a very hard insurance market right now. It's been this way for 2-3 years. Part of the balancing act that in my advice along this way, balancing public protection against the cost and availability of coverage. Obviously, you don't want to put in a requirement that people simply cannot meet. This insurance is available. It is not widely available right now, but this IPIC program has been around for a very long time. And it is clearly a program that has some critical mass, and it's available. If you are in a big law firm, my suspicion is you've already got your international exposure covered off through your excess insurance, if the law societies have that limited coverage. But and so there are markets out there, but there's not a lot of markets for this coverage right now. That will change with the ebbs and flows of the insurance cycle, but right now it's a tough part in the cycle. So I don't know if I've covered the points, Daryl. If there's anything else you wanted me to address at the outset here.
Daryl, are you good?
No,
Daryl?
I think we've identified the issues that the board needs to grapple with. They're all they're addressed in the draft resolution, and I think you're ready for the discussion among the board.
Okay, I'm going to open the floor. So we've already got Jeff's point about the wording of our resolution is important so that no one takes this to mean that those minimums are in fact enough or adequate coverage. So we want to make sure that the wording reflects that. Does anybody have any brilliant ideas on how to do that?
Well, so I think you have to be very careful. I don't think there's any question that for most trademark agents, based on what we've heard, $1 million is more than sufficient. Is sufficient. I shouldn't say more, but it's certainly sufficient. And I think the difficulty, and I was responding very quickly with Jeff's proposal, I think the difficulty with saying people can't reduce their coverage because we create is they've chosen for a whole bunch of reasons why they have $5 million of insurance. I've been around for a very long time where people have purchased excess insurance in the legal market, and they pick the amount they want based on a variety of factors. Sometimes it's a single file that requires them to increase their coverage because the monetary risk associated with one transaction is higher, and either their client or they themselves say, we need to increase our insurance in order to cover this. So they buy additional insurance. And remember that these policies are all claims made policies. So you can't just buy it for 6 months. You have to have it for the life cycle of that transaction because you need the coverage when the claim is made. And so people do that based on their circumstances. If people without mandatory insurance have been buying X millions of dollars coverage, I can't think of any rationale why they would go down to $1 million because that's now mandatory. They've been buying more for years or forever a period of time. So I just reject Jeff's proposition as I just don't think it's realistic. The difficulty that I have is trying to administer that because we have no knowledge at all what people have. And I don't know how we would ever police that they haven't reduced their limits.
Right.
So I think so that's my comment on Jeff's proposal.
So fair enough. Jeff, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find a balance here. I appreciate your rejection of my language, but and I understand where you're coming from. But I understand that it's difficult to administer. But I truly think the monkey should be on the back of the professional seeking insurance, and I don't think that the language of B suggests that. It just says it's a minimum, doesn't give any admonishment as to, that the limits of coverage should be based on a risk-based analysis of your practice, anything like that. I mean, at least some guiding lights. The point that there are going to be individuals that know that they're in a high-risk practice. They're doing, pharmaceutical work. They're doing, genomes, sequencing. Something's going to attract a higher liability than, somebody who's just trying to improve a lawn chair in the backyard, for example. I mean, there's going to be, a great disparity between those practices. And when somebody's in a high risk area, my concern is that the 2,200 professionals will, with one claim, lose their entire insurance coverage because one person was cavalier in choosing lower limits and relies on the college's proposed minimum as the basis for having done so. And so, you know, these people are professionals. They can make assessments. I think that, you know, that at least there should be some language that throws that monkey onto their back if we're going to propose that there's any sort of a minimum.
So if I may, Jeff, then, so here's what I'm wondering, two things. First of all, so Jen, I'm going to put you on the spot here for a sec. I'm just wondering, Jen or Daryl, if somebody might be able to screen share the resolution, just so that it's the wording is in front of everybody. Because what I'm looking at here is Jeff is saying, I think, Jeff, that if we were to add some wording to section B of the resolution, which currently states the limit of liability is a minimum of 1 million per claim and a 2 million aggregate.
Sorry, Jen, that's the wrong version. That's the original version.
Yeah, so Jen,
So it's the
Sorry,
one that
that's
I
Andres.
circulated today.
Andres is doing it.
so I'm looking at Daryl's CEO memo, or else perhaps the new agenda. So in item B, it says the limit of liability is a minimum of 1 million and 2 million aggregate. If we were to add wording to say something to the effect that registrants should purchase insurance based on their unique needs and risks of their circumstances with a limit of a minimum of 1 million and what, you know, like something like that, Jeff? Is that, you know?
Yeah, I would say
is that getting there?
The way I would put it is that licensees shall be responsible for ensuring that their insurance coverage is appropriate for their practice. In no event shall the limit of liability be less than a minimum of something like that.
Perfect. Yeah.
But my question is, how do I police that?
You only have, the way that wording is, in my view, you are only policing the piece that says in no case shall the limit be less than 1 million per claim and 2 million aggregate. Like that's all you're policing as a regulator, the way Jeff worded it, I think.
I mean, as time passes, I think, you know, there'll be more evidence before CPATA to make a better decision. But I just, the fears that have been brought to my attention are that, you know, without anything more than what's proposed there, that professionals will seek lower coverage, and that could be a problem not only for you know, any member of the public that was having professional services performed by those professionals, but that it would be a threat to the insurance coverage that is currently available to us through the IPIC insurance provider, for example.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to Patrick's point, I don't want to leave us in a situation on the basis of some claim with no insurer whatsoever going forward. If that could be sort of the catastrophic, you know, the catastrophe that would cause it, you know.
So
you've raised that a couple of times, and I just want to make sure that I understand your concern, because if there's a $20 million claim against someone that has $1 million limit, then the individual agent is on the hook for the 19, not the profession and not the insurer. So there's no catastrophe there.
Well, other than the client will end up holding that bag, because I don't know any licensee that can underwrite a $19 million claim.
That's correct. So you're right. It's the client that's, but the impact on the profession will not be the one that I think I'm hearing you suggest, that it will be catastrophic for the insurer. It'll be catastrophic for the claimant. I agree.
Enough. Yep, I agree. You're right.
So if we were to, so I think what we've got on the table right now is the consideration of adding some language in front of item B that indicates that every licensee is required to carry insurance based on the risks of their individual practice, and that insurance can be no less than 1 million, 2 million, et cetera. So just to add some additional language that everyone has to carry insurance, that insurance should be risk-based based on their own circumstances, and it cannot be less than X. So the things we are able to police on that, or required to police on that, is everyone's got insurance and it's not less than X. So I don't know, I feel like that might help alleviate the concern that by simply stating a minimum, that we are somehow messaging that minimum is a sufficient amount. So what do you think, everybody? Jeff, did I capture that? Okay.
Yeah, I think more or less. I mean, I think the proof of the pudding is in the tasting. So when the bylaw is prepared, I think that's what will ultimately need to reflect something like that. I mean, I appreciate what Daryl says. It's difficult to police. I know there's a speed limit sign in front of my place that's definitely not policed, but it's certainly there. And on the off chance that somebody is stopping for a coffee across the street, when they go whizzing by, they'll eventually get caught. But I mean, to me, it's just, I think that the admonishment, at least for the professionals that are insured by their various programs, they'll at least stop to think if that's the requirement.
So one of the options in terms of, and I'm going back to a comment that Karima made earlier in terms of the messaging here, I wonder if an approach might be to put some recitals prior to the resolution. So recitals that speak to the public interest, recitals that speak to the risk, and recitals that speak to the need for firms and agents to have adequate insurance. So put it in the resolution in that way, but it doesn't create what and I might be wrong, but I'm trying to make sure we don't create any ambiguity in the operative parts of the resolution while communicating the need for appropriate protection.
I think that's a great idea.
I like that.
Okay. So Daryl, oh, sorry, go ahead, Karima. Yeah.
Funny, I was playing with the other notion as we were talking as well. And I still think I lean towards the recitals, but I'm just going to throw something out there as I was playing with it. Licensees shall ensure that they acquire sufficient insurance to address the risks associated with their individual practices, provided, however, that in no event shall such coverage be less than a certain amount. Right. So, I mean, there's the two different alternatives that we can play with. I agree with Daryl that it makes it very challenging from an enforcement perspective. However, I guess if you were to ever enforce it, the question could be asked, did you actually realistically look at this issue before you assume that this was a minimum standard? So, I think I could go either way, and maybe we need to have some further discussion on this point. But I do think that I agree with Jeff, and I think where Daryl is at as well, that there needs to be a framing of how we get to where we get to.
That makes good sense. So would the board agree then that we task Daryl with coming up with a couple of alternatives, one including recitals, one including wording, if you wouldn't mind forwarding that wording, Karima, to Daryl, and come up with a couple of options that we can discuss, and if they could be provided to the board with sufficient time to consider, we can then discuss them at our board meeting at the end of the month and come to a resolution there. Is that okay, Daryl?
I think that would be perfectly
great.
I think that's the right direction to go.
Okay. Board, is everyone okay with that?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Then that's what we're going to do. In this resolution, it does say further, the board directs the CEO to have bylaws drafted and presented, in advance of a certain date. So if you wanted to get started on some of that work, you sure could, Daryl. But what we would be looking for the meeting at the end of the month is some options for a revised resolution. Okay. Perfect. Thanks so much, everyone. That was an excellent
So I
public
think I can
interest
say
focused
thank you.
discussion.
Ruth, on your behalf, I'd like to say thanks to
Yes.
Patrick for his assistance. It's good to have a rock that you can lean on. And Patrick's been just really solid. His knowledge in this field is very deep.
That's
So
wonderful. Thank you
thanks,
so much,
Patrick.
Patrick. And Patrick, I hope that some of this discussion was interesting to you too, as well, in your field.
Oh, listen, this is for me. This has been a lot of fun. You guys are building something basically from scratch over the last. I've been watching Daryl do it, and it's been fun for me because I've spent a lot of time around regulators, but not sort of watching when we built. It's been really interesting for me personally. So.
Well, that's so great, Patrick. Thank you so much. All right, we're going to move on to our next agenda item, 5.1, which is the August 31 financials and the memo from the CFO. So we are running a little bit short of time here, so I'm not wanting to limit any discussion, but I am wanting to assume that board members have reviewed the financial statements, they've read your memo, Sean, and are prepared to ask you any questions or ask for any enlightenment that they would seek after having done their own due diligence on this. So I open the floor to board members with questions, and if not, then to Sean to provide any highlights that you haven't already shared with us in the memo, Sean.
Okay. Great. Any questions at all? Fire away.
Okay, it looks like you don't have
Hey, Ruth,
questions. Oh, wait. Oh, Doug's got a question.
Okay.
Go ahead, Doug.
Well, we can see the registration numbers are reduced. We had allowed some shrinkage in the profession, knowing that some people were dabbling and would not continue on, but we've lost more members than we thought. Will that of necessity result in some changes for the budgeting into the next physical period?
That is a great question, and it's exactly what we're working on right now. Daryl and the team, we met last week to try to look at some of the expenses that we know are going to be projected for 2022. So over the next couple of weeks before we get to the next October board meeting, the plan is to look at the expenses and then go back and look at our membership or the licensee numbers, and then come back with a budget with a proposed annual fee. When we were looking at the budget for 2021, we looked at a proposed fee of $1,000 per agent for 2022, and that does look like it'll be in the ballpark. So I don't see a substantial change, but we'll know more in like the next week to 10 days for sure.
Great
Sean,
question,
do
Doug.
you want to speak to the
Thank you.
balance sheet? Sean, do you want to speak to the balance sheet because it's and the loan?
Yeah.
Sure. So the highlight on the balance sheet is the first line, the cash. We have.
I love it when the CFO says that.
Yeah. So we have as of the end of August, we had $815,000 in the bank account, and then down in the liability section, you'll see that the line of credit is $0. So we've been, I guess, successful in paying off the initial $880,000 that we borrowed from RBC as part of that this quote unquote seed money to get the college up and running. And now that is paid off with the $800,000 that we have in the bank now, based on the forecasted expenses for the rest of the year, it looks like we will hopefully not need to dip into the line of credit again before the fee season starts again in January through March. With that said, Daryl and I have also we're planning to talk to Donna over at RBC to look at what options we have for future lending facilities. We definitely don't need another $1 million line of credit to be sitting there, but the goal would be to reduce our risk and hopefully take off the federal government as they back the initial loan to have an operating loan somewhere that is more manageable. We also want to make sure that we can focus on building reserves too for any potential claims or discipline claims in the future. So that is part of that'll be part of the budgeting process as well. We're thinking somewhere like maybe a line of credit of $200,000 or $300,000 just to get us through that skinny period in the spring. But again, we'll have to wait and see potentially how the fees roll in the new year. based on, it looked like when we were doing the collections this year in the payments, we had July and August as the two payment periods, and there was a big influx first week of July. All the agents that wanted to get registered and paid up really quick, and then the lion's share came in the last couple of weeks of August. So I would be guessing that we'll be looking at March to get at least half of the fees. So we'll be working with Don at RBC to work on what we need for credit.
And so the other related issue to this is the federal government's guarantee. We share financial statements with Industry Canada. So I have alerted them to the fact that when they see the August statements after this board meeting, they will recognize that the line of credit has gone to zero. That will cause someone in their finance department to say, well, if they don't owe any money, why do we have our guarantee? So I don't think we want to let the federal government's guarantee disappear. And so that's why fixing a potential line of credit, at least for the 5 years that we thought through initially, is one that we should keep in mind. So it's a part of a discussion we will have with the federal government. The other piece that gives me some comfort is that when we did the budget initially, we hadn't built the organization in any way. And we now have built it sufficiently to have a good understanding of what the kind of the operating costs are, and what at least our initial staffing model is. And it's, you've all heard me describe this as a tiny regulator, and I think we fall into that category. And my work with our staff suggests that we're quite capable of managing the work that we see right now with our current staff. But having said that, we're going to spend time later this month doing some thinking and planning, and that will begin to create what I'll call CPATA 1.1. We're 1.0 now. So what's the incremental change that we're going to need to have? Because as soon as we start to begin to address things like continuing professional development, or mandatory pro bono, or a variety of other risk-based work. Again, to give a specific example, we've committed to outcomes measurement. We don't have the capacity to do that with our current resources. So those are the things that we'll begin to address in October specifically, and our challenge in doing the budget, because we'll present the budget to you for approval in October, will be to make sure that we've left sufficient room there to do three things. One, to make sure that we keep the line of credit at zero, so we're not paying any interest. Two, to begin to build reserves, which means to identify what the reserves need to be. And three, to create some operational capacity to do the things that we think are priorities. So those are, none of them are, they're not multi-million-dollar issues. They're all quite manageable within the resources that we have. And we'll have, when you look at the numbers that are in my CEO report, the one I highlight and will scream about to some extent is that the current structure is one in which this profession is not coming anywhere close to replicating itself. As you've seen, we only have 3 new trainees who are just starting their training cycle. And that is frightening. So, I think we have a responsibility, as we're committed to promoting availability of intellectual property services and patent and trademark services in particular. We have a real challenge to how do we increase that number so that this profession can grow. So those are really significant in terms of the long-term finances.
That's a great summary. Great summary, Daryl. So Daryl, just a housekeeping matter for you. On the agenda, I had asked you to slot in some times. I notice you've got 4:15 by one item and 4:30 by another item, but yet I thought this meeting was to end at 4 o'clock. And so I'm a bit confused. Am I driving to a close here, or do we have another half an hour?
I had originally, I thought I had sent a note to the board suggesting that we should try to extend it by half an hour because of what the agenda looked like. So it's up to you and the members of the board.
I'm going to take a really quick poll because my calendar only had this slotted till 4, but I can send a super quick text to my EA to say I'm going to need to go another half hour if everyone else is good with that. Is there anyone who's got a hard stop at 4? Karima?
Sorry, I don't at 4, but I do at 4:15.
Okay, then I'm going to suggest that we go no later than 4:15. Okay? All right, we will continue to drive forward then. So thank you. That was an excellent financial update, Sean, and great augmented comments. Daryl, thanks so much. Does anyone have any questions on the financial update, or can we move on to the CEO and registrar's update? Okay, I think I'm seeing that we're able to move on now. Daryl, you did make mention of the key point, or some of the key points in your memo. And again, assuming everyone's read it, if there's anything else you'd like to highlight, and I know that we're getting together again at the end of this month to do some planning, and I think you planted some good food for thought seeds in your memo. Those are things we're going to really need to discuss in a fulsome way when we are thinking about our strategy and how we take the college and move forward. So I'll leave it over to you again, Daryl.
I'll be very brief. I said this in my memo. We are now a regulator, so we're doing the things that regulators do, and the fact that we've had new complaints is a concern to me, and none of them are terribly serious, but there is some notion that if you build it, they will come, and we're beginning to see that. On the positive side, we're also beginning to see the people asking us ethical questions, and sometimes they don't like the answers that we're giving, and we don't give answers. We give them a framework in which they can make an analysis and exercise professional judgment, but even then they aren't always happy with that. But the highlight for me is that addressing the large number in the profession, somewhere around 65 to 70% of the profession, who have never been regulated, who have never had a code of conduct that governed their activities. If they were members of IPIC, they would have had a voluntary code of ethics, but it's never been anything close to being what the code is. And so a huge project, in my view, a huge challenge for us will be to educate the profession on their ethical and professional obligations. And that's positive, but it's a big chunk of work. We gave you the numbers, and the problem with the numbers is how difficult it is to get numbers. So we still have little more demographic information than we had a year ago, because we don't even know precisely how many agents are lawyers. We will know that come the renewal period, because we will require people to complete an annual licensee report. But how much more we can gather from that is really problematic. So we don't have good gender numbers. We've given you some sense, but they're not very reliable. And so building a demographic profile of this profession, if you just looked at the names, so we've processed, as we just told you, over 200 licensees in training, and my guess is, and Jen will correct me here, but well more than 50–60% of them are names that appear to be non-English or French. So really interesting issues for us in terms of what does that mean long-term for the profession. And so those are the again, the things, as Ruth pointed out, that we will begin to raise with you in later this month. So we're just beginning to get some basis for having an intelligent discussion, but we've got a long way to go.
Well, I would argue that all of our discussions are intelligent.
I apologize.
But but I totally take your point. So thank you. That's great, and that sets the stage for what we're going to be meeting about at the end of the month. And we have actually come to that part of our agenda where I'm just going to quickly talk about future meetings. So we are meeting October 28th 28th and 29th, I
29th
believe.
and 30th.
29th and 30th, with a pre-meet on the 28th, I think, is what you were planning there, right, Daryl?
Yeah.
So you'll get that out to the board. You'll get details out to the
because I've
board.
been communicating with you all today, but the plan is that we will have a working dinner on the 28th, and that will be at the hotel. And I will confirm for everybody their rooms and everything now that you've all given me your travel dates. And then my suggestion is that we have a casual dinner on Friday night with board and guests. And I've said to Jen and Andres that they don't have to suffer with us a second night, so they can be free. But if I think Ruth's husband is coming, and my wife is coming, and so if there are others, like Jeff had said, Renee might join him. So anyway,
That
so
could be
I think that's what I
casual.
suggested that we do, and go out to
Sure.
a restaurant and have a glass of wine, and
Okay.
and then the plan is that we will finish by noon or 12:30 on Saturday, which is a business meeting.
Okay. So so that's a little bit of pre-information for you on what's coming up at the end of the month. Karima, you've got a question before I call for a motion to adjourn?
I had a comment, and it was really just around the diversity piece. So IPIC is actually hosting its annual session, and I am speaking on the topic of diversity in the profession. And it will be, I will not be expressing opinions on behalf of the board, just general experiences for women and visible minorities around, practicing in the area of IP generally.
Karima, that's fantastic. Can you send us information so we can tune in?
I don't know if it's an open session, but I
Gotcha.
will certainly share whatever information I have, and I'm not sure what IPIC's rules are. Jeff and Doug will be able to comment on people being able to dial in without having to pay some huge fee. So,
Well, if there's an opportunity for us to watch you, I would really love to do that. So that's great. Good for you, Karima. Thank you so much. Okay, Doug.
Just my only question is, the meeting at the end of the month, is any portion of that a public meeting, or is it a planning meeting?
The Saturday morning is the public meeting. So that's
Friday will be a planning meeting and Saturday is the public meeting. Yeah, that's great. Good. Thanks for that clarification, Doug. So what I would like to do right now is call for a motion to adjourn this formal part of our public meeting. And I would like to go in camera for a few minutes with the CEO and the board. And thank you in advance to everyone who joined us today for our meeting. I think we accomplished an awful lot with a really productive agenda. So thank you, everybody. Really appreciate that. Daryl, okay with you if we call for a motion to adjourn?
And Andres, you might have to switch host to Ruth, if you can do that.
Yeah, what you can do is you can log in to the previous meeting that was scheduled.
Or we
at
could
2
just
p.m.
ask everyone to leave the meeting that isn't
Yeah.
a CEO or a board member.
Yeah,
But first,
that's fine.
before we do that though, could I get a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Doug, thank you so much. Okay, perfect.
All right.
All right,
Bye,
so
everybody.
goodbye
Thank
to
you.
everyone who's not the CEO or the board.
All right. Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone. And could you stop recording, please, Andres?
Thank you.